Hi everyone, this is Dr. Zeus Amianis, also known as Citizen Zeus, bringing you an exclusive, a compact, less than 20-minute run through, not only about all the contradictions of COVID and what's being reported and ways to straighten that up, but also the future of COVID, what it's going to look like. At the end of this video, I will give my predictions about how the course of this will go, as well as give you, as always, some great research to support some of the points going forward to bring all this information together just for you. Again, if you enjoy this information and this exclusive, please consider subscribing to this channel and even donating to this channel and visiting my website at citizenzeus.com for more information. I'm going to get right to it and put myself in the corner here and really make this a session that's going to really intrigue you. The basic points I'm going to make to this or are going to address are these points. The number one point is that COVID-19 is not going away. We must respect it, learn from it, and reach balance with it. I will address currently that the highest rates of COVID-19 infections and deaths in the US have been in the hottest states in the hottest part of the summer. So this is not your flu virus. Flu viruses have seasons. This one does not, and they certainly don't prosper in hot environments in the hottest time of the year. Young people are not at high risk for COVID-19 and in terms of hospitalization and death. Older and infirm people are overwhelmingly represented in deaths. This is also different than the flu, in which children can become quite vulnerable. Another contradiction or apparent anomaly here. Also, COVID deaths are falling significantly, even as the total number of positive tests spike sharply upward. What's the reason for that? I will go ahead and get into that in this session as well. The COVID-19 virus, the SARS-CoV-2, has a HIV-like mutation, which I've mentioned in other videos, which makes it more of a blood nerve immune disease than a respiratory disease. This is why, and I will make this claim and support it here, COVID-19 will not go away, and why we will not develop lasting immunity to it. The COVID-19 virus will learn to live in us, and we will learn to adapt to it. COVID-19, as I suggest in this video, as far as I know, not too many people are talking about this. I've put the dots together on this. Hijacks the cell damage signaling and repair system to disguise itself and replicate. More successful hijacking requires more damaged and dying cells, i.e. those with that are older or in underlying medical condition, and fewer damaged and dying cells. Younger and healthier people don't advantage this virus. I will talk about how the COVID-19 hijacks both the clotting mechanism of our body, these megakaryocytes, and also hijacks the immune response of our body. And these two will explain by far the deaths and the real problem with this disease, which is not as much a respiratory disease as a blood, nerve, and immune disease. And finally, we will do some evidence on viral load as not being a good indicator for how much damage this will cause you. And again, we'll present research on that. And also the newest research, just days old, that appears we do not have lasting immunity, given that neutralizing antibodies to COVID-19 are fading rather quickly after infection. What are the implications for all these things? Well, I'll give you a summary. In many ways, it's reinforcing what I've said before, and it's optimistic. If we keep in good health, if we treat this disease in a very straightforward fashion, we're going to be in pretty good shape. So let's jump right into the first point I made. COVID-19 is not going away. We must respect from it, learn from it, and reach balance with it. Currently, the highest rates of COVID-19 infections and deaths in the US have been in the hottest states in the hottest part of the summer. That's the opposite of the flu coronavirus. Let's look at it right now. On medium.com, the Atlantic article, COVID-19 cases are rising, so why are deaths flatlining? In Arizona, Florida, and Texas, and to a certain extent, by the way, Southern California, all with very elevated elderly populations for the most part, and also some of the hottest places in the hottest part of the summer, are seeing deaths increase. In fact, in those three states, not including California, Arizona, Florida, and Texas, The 7-day averages of deaths is up 69%. In all the rest of the country, average deaths are continuing to go down 46% since June 7th. So let's go on to our next point here. Young people under the age of 18 in particular are rarely displaying grave symptoms of COVID-19, much less dying from this virus. Older people and people with underlying conditions or medical conditions are overwhelmingly represented in the deaths. Oftentimes with flu, children are quite vulnerable even to deaths. I found that flus were 50 times more likely to kill someone, at least by early April, as I showed in another video, as COVID. Again, if this is such a terrifying disease, why is that such the case? And we look into it more deeply. There's another Atlantic article posted in medium.com. You can see it up here in the URL, which suggests that a second coronavirus death surge is coming. I contradict that, and I will show you why I contradict that as we come up. But it does say here, the proportions of infections of younger people increased in June and July compared with March and April, and they have a much lower risk of dying. So you got large cases of young people, much fewer cases in terms of threat and risk and dying. And here's a local example exactly that suggests that is the case. I'm going to go ahead and move my picture into the middle here so that you can see how many total deaths there have been by age group. Again, none under 50 in all of Placer County, which has about 400,000 people, okay? And yet, look over here. Most of the cases that are developing now, 62% of them are between 18 and 49. Again, a lot of that from party. But look here, at the top here, we had 9 deaths in this first little bump, almost all of them, again, elderly. This huge so-called increase, it's not that much. We only have still 14, almost not shy of 1,500 laboratory confirmed cases. There were only 3 deaths in this huge increase in the number of cases and only a slight increase in deaths. 9 over here compared to just 3 more over here. So that becomes significant. Is it saying anything about the trend of this virus? Well, let's see. COVID-19 rates are falling significantly even as the total number of positive tests spike sharply upward. Some reasons for this: younger people are getting it. We just discussed that. Virus may be mutating. It is mutating. We do know that. We're speculating that it may be mutating in a less virulent or less deadly direction, as most viruses do, and that health science is developing more effective interventions. Steroids have been discovered, nicotinoids, CBD is really helping, as well as important internal ways to fortify immune response. Vitamin D has been researched and could have perhaps cut mortality even in half. Vitamin C and vitamin B3 have also shown signs of very helping, and not to mention sleep, hydration, probiotics, whole food, plant-based, anti-inflammatory diets, and so forth. All of these are going to be very, very key when it comes to handling this disease. To those who are telling you there's going to be a vaccine or a miracle drug, it seems as if the most reliable ways to deal with this disease have to do with fortifying our own immune systems and also beginning to understand the profile of this disease. So as I move on, you'll notice, even amidst all of the panic about the late surges in the US and how it's getting out of control, numbers of deaths have been relatively flatlined in the United States. They've done slightly better in Europe. They came from a higher height. They've gone to a little bit lower, okay? But overall, the death rate continues to decrease. If you look at the total number of deceased recently, I think this is either today's or yesterday's, and the total number of confirmed cases, you're going to find that it's about 0.4% death rate, which is, according to my calculations, about double some flu rates. But again, it continues to come down. At first, they were saying it was going to be 10 or 20 times as much. At this point, it looks like it's within double or even less than that. So let's move on. Here's something else unique that's happening, okay? Again, from the same Atlantic article about why COVID-19 cases are rising and deaths are flatlining. This is unusual. This is a chart showing you the estimated hospitalizations, reported hospitalizations, and deaths. These all went together until recently. They've started to diverge. Deaths continue to go down, and even though now hospitalizations and reported hospitalizations are going up. So something's either happened to this virus in terms of mutation, something, maybe the people going into these hospitals are younger, or maybe we're just learning to deal with it better. We have a better grip of this. And I think it's mostly the latter. And we're getting to have a better understanding and grip on this, what to do and what not to do. Where are these deaths happening? Again, you look at this overall data that ends in July 22nd, just a day or two ago. It's more or less flatlining here, even with the increased cases in our country. The main upticks, most of the states are bell curves. There are little upticks in Louisiana. California has had this new little sort of second wave here, second mini wave here. And of course, those other states we already talked about, Florida going up, Georgia going up slightly, Texas going up significantly, and I believe also Arizona had a bit of an uptick as well, as we saw before. So everybody heard about the cautionary tale of Sweden. Well, Sweden's doing just fine. Their deaths, even though they are trying to achieve herd immunity in a more moderate thing where they go ahead and they didn't yank kids out of school or close down the economy, adapted some best practices, their cases keep going down to almost zero, according to this, which was referenced in Wikipedia. In fact, on July 22nd, they said zero, but near zero. And if you look at the total number of cases, even though the cases which spiked around June 23rd or so, they've come down and continue to come down. So the cautionary tale that is Sweden from this data is not merited. It's not a cautionary tale. And I'm going to even make the argument that they are actually doing the right thing. Here's a very important point. COVID-19 virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, has an HIV-like mutation, which makes it more of a blood nerve immune disease than a respiratory disease. This is why the COVID-19 will not go away and why we will not develop lasting immunity to it. The COVID-19 virus will learn to live in us and we will learn to adapt to it. This was first discovered back in February, and it was in a Chinese article and in a popular pace, the South China Morning Post, the 27th of February. We have known this for a long time, and yet we're not admitting it. It has an HIV-like mutation. Some people are saying it was naturally produced. Other people say lab produced. But the fact is it does have this mutation, and no one can argue with that point. This mutation attacks this thing called the ACE2 receptor, which has to do with what exists in the lungs and in other areas of the body. And this receptor, the ACE2 protein receptor, does not exist in large quantity in healthy people. Key point. People that are older and underlying conditions with dead or damaged cells are the ones that have more of these receptors and have more of an entry point for this disease, which makes sense because that's who it's overwhelmingly affecting. Other highly contagious viruses, including HIV and Ebola, target an enzyme called furin. Okay, what's different about this and SARS, this virus here, okay, and they show it here, okay, is that this virus, this COVID-19 virus, can actually hijack to a certain extent the furin aspect that cleaves cells, membranes, and allow this COVID-19 to enter into a cell much, much greater than your average SARS virus that doesn't have this mutation. According to the study, here it is, the mutation can generate a structure known as a cleavage site in the new coronavirus spike protein. The virus uses the outreaching spike protein to hook onto the host cell, but normally this protein is inactive. The cleavage site structure's job is to trick the human furin protein so it will cut and activate the spike protein and cause a direct fusion of the viral and cellular membranes. Compared to the SARS wave entry, this binding method is 100 to 1,000 times as efficient, according to the study. That's why a lot of people thought this was created in a lab. Getting that HIV-like mutation and naturally to occur seems less likely than actual gain-of-function research in that lab to purposely make it happen. And that's not even denied. The UNC Chapel Hill, as well as the Wuhan Institute of Virology, were working on those things. And it's very plausible that it got out of their labs and their research. Of course, they're not going to admit that. So this is how it operates. The COVID-19 hijacks the cell damage signaling and repair system to disguise itself and replicate. It is transmitted through respiratory, but it operates and creates its primary damages in the blood and immune system. The more successful hijacking requires more damage than dying cells, i.e. those people that are older and with underlying conditions, versus fewer damage in dying cells, i.e. younger and healthier people. That's the first point. The second point is that COVID-19 hijacks itself through two main mechanisms. One, replication associated with megakaryocytes. These are the platelets and clotting mechanisms, and this explains why there is massive clotting being found in the bodies of people with advanced COVID-19 throughout the body, especially in the organs. And secondly, it's confusing and overstimulating our immune response. Now, I've talked about both of these in my previous videos. I did a much more extensive, slower long-term. I'm trying to make this more compact. But these things create a pro-inflammatory cytokine storm autoimmune reaction that attacks our body. So there's two main ways that we get killed by this COVID-19 virus. We start off with unhealthy cells or older or dying cells to begin with that allows these ACE2 receptors and more of these these COVID-19 viruses to attach and lyse and enter our cells, split into our cells. And once they're in there, they're creating this replication associated with platelets and clotting, and they're also creating this overwhelming pro-inflammatory response, which is confused because this virus is hiding itself and almost using these mechanisms to replicate itself. So our body doesn't know what to go after. So now we're here, and we have scientific proofs of this. Pathologists found blood clots in almost every organ during autopsies of the COVID-19 patients. Now, here's the thing that I looked at that was most particular. I'll just go ahead and read this from the CNN Health report. What we saw at autopsy was a sort of extension of that, she said, this doctor, Dr. Amy Rapowitz, Rapkowitz. The clotting was not only in the large vessels, but also in the smaller vessels. And this was dramatic because though we had expected it in the lungs, we found it in almost every organ that we looked at in our autopsy study, okay? And the autopsies also showed something unusual about megakaryocytes, or large bone marrow cells. They usually don't circulate outside the bones and lungs, she said. We found them in the heart and the kidneys and the liver and other organs, she said. Notably in the heart, the megakaryocytes produce something called platelets that are intimately involved in blood clotting. So there you have it, blood clotting. Extraordinary and explanatory in terms of understanding why this disease is so devastating and why certain things have actually worked, like autoimmune lessening drugs, including steroids, to get over that pro-inflammatory response. Now, this just tells you what megakaryocytes are and how they may be implicated in this. What's unique about megakaryocytes, which are the things that produce platelets or the things that clot our blood, is they're one of the few areas in the body that can replicate their DNA through cytokinesis. Now, cytokinesis means that this is a replication within the cell. Normally, cells replicate their DNA and then they split off, okay? And they create two new cells and then they split, they replicate and split into this. These do not do that. They're large cells and they can produce, without splitting, up to 32 copies of the normal complement of DNA in a human cell. Think of what could happen if the virus, the COVID-19 virus, was able to lyse or use that furin thing to lyse into a megakaryocyte and then hijack the replication mechanism to get 32 copies of DNA that it could use, and then lyse out of that and began to infiltrate into the rest of the body. What a perfectly elegant way for them to reproduce. They don't even have to get out of the cell to do that reproduction. They hijack one of the few cells in the body that actually can replicate chromosomes within a cell without actually splitting into different cells. So I think there should be a lot more research to see if these virus particles are getting in there and hijacking that mechanism. I don't have definition on that, but I do have some logic behind me, and I'd be very curious to see what's happening. Here's another thing here. When Sid does get in that cell and get back out, he has these things called philopodia. They're kind of gross looking here, where they have the viral particles going out almost like tendrils to neighboring cells and then go ahead and affecting them. They're calling these, very fantastically zombie cells and so forth. But let's take a look at here. Obeying instructions from the virus, the newly infected cell sprouts multipronged tentacles studded with viral particles. And they call them zombie cells, appear to use these streaming filaments or philopodia to reach still healthy surrounding cells. What's really important to know here is that regardless of all this fear-based imagery, okay, and all the way of hijacking and, oh my gosh, it's taking my body over, we still have the data. And the data says that when you're healthy, especially young and healthy, for the most part, your body handles this, oftentimes even without symptoms. So the whole point is to begin to disrupt this ability to be in your body by being healthy, using best practices. And in terms of the larger society, using best practices around testing, tracing, wearing masks in closed public settings, and just understanding your risks. And then we go to the next thing. This is important too, because usually viral load, that is the amount of viruses we have in a body, is a good indicator of how sick we're going to get. Apparently with COVID-19, this is not so. The COVID-19 damage has much more to do with how our bodies are handling the virus. And to go on here to another point I'm making, it also appears from research, very recent research, that we may not have lasting immunity, given that neutralizing antibodies to COVID-19 fade rather quickly after infection, okay? Now, I'd all talked about in the other videos about, well, there are 4 points I brought up, but I'll put 5 points in the chain now. There's transmission, which is taken care of by physical distancing, mask testing, tracing, so forth. Attachment to the cells, which we just talked about, the ACE2 receptors. If you have a lot of dead and dying cells, you have more ACE2 receptors, more opportunity for this COVID to get a hold of you. Entering into the cell, that's an HIV-like function that allows it to lyse using furin into its cells. And replication within the cell, we talked about that in terms of its association with megakaryocytes. And finally, spreading outside of the cell, that has to do with those philopodia, or those tentacles, okay? So we can interrupt it at any one of these, but the one thing I didn't say here is the most important overall thing is just to be able to have a healthy body that has the proper nutrients and the proper elements in it to recognize, to be on alert, to have a good, healthy biome and system to handle this. And if you do, even if you have a high viral load, you will be able to handle it most likely, okay? Again, your risk is much, much lower. And here it is. Here are the articles on this that absolutely affirm this. This is a Nature article. I'll go up here and just take a look at it. Coronavirus research updates, and this is very recent, within the last couple of days. And it's taking basically these different articles and research and outlining them. I will take 2 things from this. The first has to do with the 2 distinct stages and the notion that viral load is not a good predictor of the severity of the disease. These scientists noticed, this is a study done fairly recently, 2 distinct stages. Early in the disease, people have high viral loads, which tend to decline gradually, okay? And then later, as the decline of the viral loads can serve as a cue to start treating infected people with anti-inflammatory drugs. Because that is when the viral loads are going down, that's when your system becomes inflamed, and that itself can be an indicator of, can be a contributor to fatality, okay? And researchers found, get this, no correlation between viral load and the severity of the disease, That's absolutely critical. The other point here is in the next article that antiviral antibodies peter out within weeks after infection, which suggests to me, okay, that much like herpes, this, which is also a blood sort of disease that happens within the body, as well as HIV, okay, this is going to be one that is not something we just get over or have a vaccine against, but one we learn to accommodate and will have lessened severity over time, as with HIV, as with herpes and other diseases that are of that nature. If we see it in that terms and not as a respiratory disease and not focus so much on the vaccine, I think we're going to be putting our efforts in the right direction. Those are the 2 points I want to make with that. Most of the drugs that have come up, including this doctor in Dallas, dexamethasone was also been shown to reduce fatalities by a significant percentage. This doctor came up with another steroid. This one's called budesonide. This one is, I think, in Dallas or Houston. It's one of the Texas doctors. Unsurprisingly, especially if you do it after the viral load comes down a little bit, that this would help, quote, cure or ameliorate some of the inflammatory symptoms of the disease. And then finally, here are my predictions. 1, given this data, the different strains of COVID-19 viruses will continue to mutate, becoming more communicable and less deadly over time. Viruses can't live in dead bodies. Less lethal and more transmissible viruses do better. There will be a second wave of COVID-19, not as big or as bad as the first in terms of fatality, because isolation will not be effective and people will not have permanent immunity. So you can expect people to get infected over and over again in terms of this, especially if they've gone through a session and their health is low. Just as they are with herpes, just as with HIV, these underlying abilities to create equilibrium with the environment get disrupted through emotional stress, lack of sleep, poor eating habits, and so forth. Those are the things that are going to attack you or make it more dangerous. Another prediction I'm making: the Swedish model will not be a cautionary tale, but will be proven to be the right way to handle COVID-19. Combining best practices around slowing the spread, which they've done, and allowing herd exposure. And I say word exposure because herd immunity will not be forthcoming. There will be no effective vaccine or once and for all cure for COVID-19, just as there isn't for HIV or herpes. That's another prediction. And then here's another one. SARS-CoV-2 will act more like herpes than a flu. Staying in our bodies and being managed by good health practices, it will not go away in a year or two, but lessen in severity over time through mutation and management with good health and lowered emotional stress. As I've shown in my other videos, okay? Those things are those things that lower inflammation, stress, free radicals in the body, that help with fitness, that lower the amount of dying, damaged, and cells in your body. Sleep, hydration, exercise, plant-based, whole foods diet, meaningful work and social connections, okay? Bad health practice will harm fitness, emotional stresses, junk food, electronic and environmental pollution, toxins, and so forth. So there we have it. We can see from these past things that when we get exercise and ridiculously over the top about these things, we don't realize how much of these viruses are already in the population. Already, an estimated 2/3 of the population of the entire world has herpes type 1, okay? The one that has usually produces cold sores around the mouth. Most of these people go without symptoms their entire life, okay? So we're talking almost 4 billion people with this, okay? And as we go forward, okay, it says this: there is no cure for this. There is only equilibrium. Antiviral medications like the ones you see on TV is alcyclovar and famciclovar and valacyclovir and all these other things. They can reduce the severity and frequency of symptoms, but they can't actually cure the disease. And in fact, there are some studies that would suggest that these suppressive type things actually end up causing more problems, because if you get off the drug, you have even a greater resurgence of the disease. So these are the kinds of things that Big Pharma and so forth want to say. You have to rely on our drugs. But they haven't done the due diligence to say, does maintaining your health work better? In almost every case, if they did this study, I am very certain in these kinds of diseases that it would. And of course, that's why those studies aren't put out there. Again, remember when HIV was considered to be a death sentence at the very beginning? What has happened over the last 30 to 40 years in terms of HIV? Well, the number of incidents, okay, is something on the order of 36,000 infections, okay? This is 2018 data, okay? Much, much lower. Still, again, much of drug users and usually bisexual populations. But for the most part, it is not a death sentence now, to the point now where a lot of people go completely asymptomatically, not just people with a strange gene mutation, but something like 1 in 7 aren't symptomatic. So our bodies over time have learned to create a relationship with the HIV virus, such that, again, a good many of them don't even get treatment. Here I'm trying to think in terms of treatment, diagnosis and treatment and living with it. Yeah, here it is. Young people are the most likely to be unaware of their infection at all. An estimated almost 50% of young people ages 13 to 24 were living with HIV were unaware of their infection, okay? So we have seen symptoms, especially with younger or healthier bodies, be managed to the point where people don't even recognize it. And look at deaths here. Just 15,000 deaths in 2018. And this is deaths due to any cause. These are just HIV positive people. So it isn't even that HIV necessarily caused their death. So this gives us a very intense confirmation that our own bodies, our societies, we are part of nature, part of biome. I think Zach, I can forget the last guy's, the guy's last name, has mentioned this in one of his films. He also brought up this NIH article and study, which mapped with 8,000 people the various proteins and virus sequences in their body, and that 42% of them had herpes, hepatitis C, hepatitis B, HIV. And at the same time, they were all managed because the bodies had learned to develop some kind of equilibrium with these, such that they didn't really affect their health. And we all know this. We have E. coli in our body. We have streptococcus in our body. That we have been shown, but not many of us have been shown this. And so finally, our conclusion here. Here it is. It was always about keeping COVID-19 under the dotted line of medical capacity here, okay? As we found out more and more about this disease, we are finding out about it. And what we are finding out is that we cannot escape the virus. It is requiring us to deal with a broken medical system, a broken economic system, frankly, a broken culture and social system with Black Lives Matter and so forth, and an unhealthy lifestyle. There will be no drugs or shortcuts, but radical self and other responsibility. We have to be responsible for ourselves and each other. Hiding until vaccines are developed could increase your chances of dying from COVID-19 or subsequent disease because it helps you to neglect your health. The number one way you can go ahead and create equilibrium and a healthy relationship with whatever virus you face, and also because this thing called antibody-dependent enhancement, in which certain vaccines can actually increase your chance of dying from a subsequent disease. I talked about that in my other videos. If you're interested, you can go back into my catalog and do that. Bottom line, there will be no escape or miracle cure. We must be responsible to nature, our bodies, ourselves, and each other. We have to become more responsible, and in so doing, discover a new, more empowered and healthier life. COVID-19 is the great revealer of our underlying health and emotional structure, not to mention our society, our economy, and almost in our environmental situation. So in that ways, there is a certain grace in this. It is helping us reveal the truth of ourselves, our societies, each other, and what we need to get right going into the future to be healthy. So we both need to be in good shape. We have to have courage and good sense, and those are the true antidotes for this virus. So I hope that's been helpful. I've tried to really lay it out there. I did a more produced and outlined thing here to keep it shorter. But again, thank you for watching. If you have time, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Pass it around. Take time to donate if you want more research like this. Together, we can work towards something that is neither fear-based nor contributing to a drug regime and an oppressive system that's trying to control our bodies or try to hedge us into dependencies on things that we shouldn't be dependent on. So neither one of these needs to be where we go. We can actually come together across ideological lines, across cultural lines and international boundaries to start to understand as human beings and as part of nature, how do we best look at these things, not in fear, but in perception, truth, and health. So I'll leave you with that. Again, this is Dr. Zeus Yamianis, also known as Citizen Zeus, signing off and saying thank you for watching.